Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 1 of The Familiar of Zero, Night of the Twin Moons. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off with Saito and company, things were sort of on the mend. It turns out Louise is competent in a form of magic, albeit one that's mostly lost. Reconquista was repelled from Tristane for the time being, and Saito and Louise's relationship seems to be on the mend, even if, Louise isn't always willing to admit it. However, it seems as though Saito has returned home in that Zero, which, it's a bit of a shock because I distinctly recall him missing the eclipse, but, well, you never really know, do you, with things like magic, sometimes stuff can just happen. However, if I recall, this was sort of like a nod to something that was going on in the light novels, whereby, Saito was sort of hit all at once with a bunch of homesickness and all that was otherwise suppressed by the magic of becoming a familiar. And I do seem to recall that a lot of that stuff was sort of cut out of the anime just for, time and all that, but I'm wondering if this might be like a little concession towards that plotline. I mean, I guess it does kind of make sense. Saito has returned home, but he realizes that none of it really truly matters without Louise, even if he isn't necessarily willing to admit that to her. Oh, you know what? This is probably just a bad dream. It's like one of those dreams where you dream you're falling and then you wake up. Although I suppose in this case, Saito did literally fall out of bed. It is rather telling that Louise was letting him sleep in the bed rather than on the floor, so, I guess that's indicative that things are going really well. Although that said, seeing as how Saito's antics have woken her up in the middle of the night, I think, she's probably liable to whip him again. I mean, we do see that little hint of an expression that she's sort of gratified by him being so happy to see here. But, man, she can't help herself. Deeply unfortunate. Deeply, deeply unfortunate. Okay, well, there we go. There's some progress at least. She is still somewhat cold and distant, but she's at least willing to not call him a dog, and not whip him, and not make him sleep on the floor. And the only real condition is the entirely reasonable thing of leave that stupid maid alone and all the other girls. And when you get down to it, I feel like that's an easy enough thing to accomplish, but, knowing Saito, I reckon circumstances will conspire to land him in more trouble. At least the sword has a good understanding of the situation. It's like, yeah, you guys are probably going to keep fighting, but at least you do like each other by my reckoning. Now, normally during the opening theme, I would sit quietly with reverence, but today I am obligated to my sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than myself. You may not know this, but I write light novels, and I've written quite a few. Today, I'm going to tell you about the eccentric detective Yamamoto, in which the intrepid, if drunken detective solves a wide variety of cases with the help of her assistant Satoshi. Ranging from finding missing pets and surveilling cheating spouses to catching a high-end cat burglar and preventing the murder of a local business magnate, no case is too big or too small for Detective Yamamoto. Even when she's forced to work with, and occasionally against, the police, and even when she must contend with her fear of the supernatural, nothing will prevent the eccentric detective from doing what needs to be done to solve the case. If this sounds like something you'd like to read, then by all means, consider purchasing books in the Eccentric Detective Yamamoto series by me, Frederick Fitzgerald, through Amazon. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the episode. Oh boy, I have to say I really do love the opening themes to The Familiar of Zero. The first one and this one especially, I would have to say, are my two favorites. However, given that the title of the episode is Her Highness is Zero, I get the feeling this is going to be a princess-centric episode. And yeah, here we go. I guess coronation is the theme of the day here. Princess Henrietta claims she does not need to be coronated, but I guess the idea is that it would be good for morale to have a real queen, someone actually sitting on the throne rather than presumably a regent. And, I get it. I get why Princess Henrietta would be loath to go through with this. It's a lot more responsibility. And, I'm given to understand she's quite young. Nevertheless, it's one of those things where, your duty is to your people and your country, so you kind of gotta do it. You can't dither too much. Now, speaking of dithering, I can only imagine that Cromwell here is in prison in Tristane, but, honestly, more fool them for keeping that guy alive. Things are not good here. And I feel like, realistically, they should probably have just executed him summarily, as was well within their right to do. The guy wrongfully usurped a throne and was waging war, so, really, when you get down to it, I feel like, you probably should just, guillotine this guy. Now that said, he seems to be, not the top of the totem pole here. The woman he's talking to on the other side of the cell door, she's hearing for the first time about, the void magic and all that, but she seems to be in a position to chastise this guy, and ultimately, teach him a lesson for failing. I do find it interesting that she too wields a magic ring, even if it's not necessarily Andvari's ring. There is a question of what happened with that. I believe we sort of saw a little bit in the ending of the previous season, where I can only assume it was Return to the Spirit of Water, but, I feel like we weren't explicitly shown. So I feel like this is where most of the levity is going to come in here. So Louise has already said she's going to be more trusting of Saito and all that. They're going to have a good relationship, but now she's demanding he put on these utterly bizarre glasses, claiming they're a magic artifact. And once Saito does it, that's it. She is clearly maliciously happy about this. So the glasses don't come off. And Saito, rather than thinking anything odd about this, he's just, kind of goes along with it. More fool him, really, because now that he's out in public with Louise, he's naturally in a position to run across people he knows. And, siesta is a common point of things going wrong. I find it interesting that she's not immediately wondering what the glasses are all about, but ooh. So this is interesting. Siesta might be trying to not necessarily put him down gently here, but sort of remind him that hey, you stayed here for the sake of Louise, maybe pay more attention to her. Unfortunately, I think I know what these glasses do, whenever Saito behaves lasciviously, it will alert Louise. And she said she's not gonna whip him, but she never said anything about blowing him up with void magic. And frankly, she seems to be in a mood to do just such a thing. 'Cause Saito, he wasn't exactly hiding his lasciviousness, he was looking right at Siesta. I feel like the worst part about all of this is that, there's sort of a mismatched, expectation here. To some degree, Saito can't help it, the poor guy, him being an adolescent and all that. But on the other hand, I feel like Louise isn't entirely honest herself here. She could go a little ways to captivate him, I think there's a saying, it's you don't go looking for a hamburger if you have steak at home. And I am of the belief that Saito is in that position, he's just not stupendously aware of it yet. And quite frankly, blowing him up with magic isn't exactly the sort of thing that's going to convince him. You know, you have to use the carrot and the stick, as it were. Favoring the stick all the time isn't going to do anyone any favors. More to the point, dragging Saito around right at, like, skirt level, that's not going to do anyone any favors either. In no small part because Montmorency has decided, seemingly for no reason, to wear a really, really short dress. You know, deeply unfortunate that it's right at Saito's eye level. I can't help but wonder if the glasses take intention into account here. I feel like they likely do, but man. It's deeply unfortunate that Saito being blown up by Louise is swiftly becoming a common occurrence to the point that all the teachers up to and including the headmaster are like, oh boy, they're at it again. I feel like maybe Louise should give it a rest. You know, once you blow the guy up like 3 times in one day, like you're probably starting as you mean to go on. Like you'd be better off like giving him a blindfold or something. Oh dear. Now it is telling, for one reason or another, that the glasses aren't going off when he looks at Louise. And I don't believe for a moment it's not because he's not looking at her. I feel like it has to be something where it's like, it's only when he's looking at other women that it goes off. And I get why a magic item would be designed in such a way, but I feel like it's setting everyone up for failure, you know? Like, if Louise was aware how much Saito is looking at her, then, you know, maybe she would feel better about the whole thing. If only because the number of occurrences it goes off in her presence would dwarf that of all the other women combined. Now, equally unfortunately, Louise is just setting up Saito for failure. You know, he's covering his eyes. He's learned his lesson, sort of. But as the princess's procession marches past, he's bid to look at the princess. You know, knowing full well what is likely going to happen. Oh no, surely Louise isn't going to cause an explosion in public by the princess soon-to-be queen. I mean, I reckon this is gonna get them thrown in a cell. Oh dear. So, you know, one would normally think that Louise's clout as an aristocrat and as a friend of the princess, like, that would shield her from consequences, but, you know, I don't know. It's something when you have, like, the royal guard surrounding you with swords drawn here. You know, that's not a good place to be. And, you know, sure, Louise can rely on a bunch of titles and things like that to sort of make her way, but, man, the guards are... they're not taking anything, you know? They're, whoa, buddy. Yeah, alright, so technology is swiftly improving if they have firearms here for the, presumably the captain of the guard, if I had to guess, to say, like, hey, a gun's faster than a wand, so drop it. Like, I get it, but, whoa, buddy. You know, it seems like, things aren't boding well for wizardry by and large if, you know, they now have gunpowder here. It's sort of like, you know, I feel like, you don't tend to have, like, knights in shining armor on horseback with lances too much once you start really having guns, if only because, you know, you can shoot someone from way far off and be done with it. Okay. So, I guess I was sort of right in my assessment. You know, Louise hasn't exactly been clapped in irons and tossed in cell, but Saito sure has. And I feel like, you know, maybe as a familiar, he should be precluded from something like that, but, who knows? So yeah, Saito, the poor guy, this isn't exactly a great place to be, because he's essentially left to ruminate on things. You know, when you get down to it, this whole situation arose because Louise was so utterly jealous. She gave him this trouble-causing magic item, which then, caused trouble, which she escalated. So, things aren't good. And even though the princess is visiting him personally, I feel like things aren't liable to get much better in the immediate future, I mean, sure, if the princess deems it so, Saito can be released, and she probably would do that, but at the same time, this is a real incident, and even if the princess forgives them, I feel like her knights and bodyguards and all that, they would be less willing. I guess case in point, Agnes here, she slugged Saito in the face and was willing to shoot him, so I don't know, things aren't exactly great, even if Saito is allegedly trusted by the princess with good reason. Oh dear indeed. So that Agnes woman, she sounds like trouble if she's willing to shoot someone against the express orders of the princess. Although Saito's not exactly doing himself any favors here. Maybe he would do well to just sort of slightly leave the princess alone a little bit. Or at least hear her out. So it seems like, in a weird sort of way, Saito's secret is out, Louise is a void mage, he is the familiar Gandalfer, and I guess it's not exactly surprising that the princess would eventually learn about this, it pertaining to national security and all that, but I guess the salient information is that the princess says, hey, look, we want to avoid a protracted war if possible, and we need you to do stuff. So the question is, what precisely will he be doing, Because when you get down to it, Louise is, she's one wizard, yes, void magic is incredible and far beyond anything else we've seen magically, but, what can one person do in a war? If you were to sort of make a modern analogy, Louise is like, I guess, a nuclear bomb. Like a small one, I guess, like an early bomb, but one nonetheless. But that said, one bomb isn't enough to win a war, no matter how big and magnificent an explosion is. So, one has to wonder what the princess has in mind here. I mean, she's sort of immediately bidding them to remain undercover because there might be spies and all that, but I don't know. What exactly can she send Louise to do? I mean, perhaps it might be as simple as rooting out spies and traitors, seeing as how, whoa. Well, Cromwell was killed, and rather horrifically so, him now being a desiccated husk. That was a rather grim thing to show us, and that was probably a horrible way to die. I can't help but wonder if it was related to the Ring of Andvari, just because, we know that ring bestows false life, whereas he seemed to have been, utterly drained and desiccated of all life, in a way that, implies, a sort of similar power in my mind. Now, I guess fortunately, after this whole episode, Louise is, sad and apologetic about everything. Well, I guess maybe not apologetic. She's sort of foisting the blame onto Saito. Unfairly, I might add. She's saying, how dare you make me worry, not, I'm really, really sorry for getting you thrown in jail. I feel like a little apology might be in order, just a little one. She doesn't necessarily have to do it in front of the princess, if only to save face, but, a little apology would go a long way. So this is something else. Louise has been given a book passed down through the Tristan royal family, which allegedly has void spells written in it, but is so far entirely blank. And I reckon this is similar to what happened before in the previous season, whereby Saito defends her, and then as she enters the right state of mind, the spells appear. Oh dear, Saito. So he's looking into things a little too deeply here, thinking that maybe the blank pages are, a deliberate sort of thing, that, to embody the essence of void magic, one must also become a void, empty your mind, think of nothing. I get why you would say that sort of thing, but the cultural illusion is entirely lost on Louise. Ooh. That's something for Agnes to pass along this code phrase saying that, you guys are going to be codename Zero here. And also, Saito, don't act out around the queen. And also, the Musketeer Force will be communicating with you on behalf of the princess. So it's I don't know. That's a whole bunch of interesting information that's probably going to cause problems. Oh dear. So Louise has reneged, she's calling him a dog, she's whipping him. The only thing left is to make him sleep on the floor, which is, probably imminent. And I feel like, maybe she shouldn't be freaking out so much, if only because she was already sort of aware of what got them into all this trouble. For all she knows, Agnes could be referring to what had already happened. Ah, dear. So here we go. Derflinger knew this was going to happen, as did we all, but nevertheless, it was inevitable. Things must always return to the status quo, no matter how painful it is. And speaking of painful, Agnes has arrived just in time to witness the continued beating that Saito has received. And it's bad when the beating has progressed throughout the entire night and into the morning. But, personal foibles aside, this is really important here because the princess has been kidnapped. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.